The poor girl was sleeping on the floor with the baby. The billionaire saw, and in 1 minute everything changed, and what the billionaire discovered made him cry. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the windows of William Harrison's black Mercedes as he pulled into the empty parking lot behind St. Mary's Cathedral. At 45, he'd built an empire worth $3 billion. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight marked exactly 3 years since the accident that took everything from him. He sat in the darkness, engine running, watching the rain create rivers on his windshield. This had become his ritual, parking here on Emma's anniversary, remembering his 7-year-old daughter's laugh, her tiny hand in his. That's when he saw her. A small figure huddled against the cathedral's side door, barely visible in the shadows. Will squinted through the rain. It was a child, a little girl with matted brown hair, clutching something to her chest. She couldn't be more than 7 years old. His heart stopped, the same age Emma would have been. Will grabbed his umbrella and stepped into the storm. As he approached, he realized what the girl was holding, a baby, maybe 8 or 9 months old, wrapped in a torn pink blanket. "Sweetie," he called gently, crouching down. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up with enormous brown eyes filled with exhaustion and fear. Her lips were blue from the cold, and the baby in her arms was eerily quiet. "We're waiting," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Mama said she'd come back." Will's chest tightened. The child's clothes were soaked through, and he could see she was shivering uncontrollably. "How long have you been waiting here?" "Since yesterday morning," she said, adjusting her grip on the baby. "Tommy's hungry, but I gave him the last bottle." Yesterday morning. These children had been here for over 24 hours in this weather. "What's your name?" Will asked, opening his umbrella wider to shelter them. "Sophie," she said. "Sophie Martinez. This is my baby brother Tommy." Will's hands trembled as he looked at Sophie's determined little face, so much like Emma's when she was being brave. But there was something else, a haunting familiarity in her features that made his breath catch. "Sophie, I'm going to help you, okay? Both of you." She shook her head firmly. "Mama said strangers are dangerous. She said to wait right here." The baby stirred and let out a weak cry. Sophie immediately began rocking him, humming a lullaby that made Will's eyes burn with unshed tears. It was the same song he used to sing to Emma. "Sophie," he said gently, "what's your mama's name?" For a moment she hesitated. Then in a voice so small he almost missed it, she whispered, "Maria Elena Martinez." The name hit Will like a physical blow. His vision blurred, and he gripped the umbrella handle so tightly his knuckles went white. It couldn't be. After all these years, it was impossible. But as he stared at Sophie's face, really looked at her features in the dim streetlight, he saw it. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. She looked exactly like Emma, exactly like the daughter he'd lost, and exactly like someone else he'd tried desperately to forget. Will didn't hesitate. He scooped Sophie and Tommy into his arms, feeling how light they both were. Too light. The little girl weighed no more than a feather, and the baby felt fragile as glass. Sophie protested weakly, her small fists pushing against his chest. "No, no, Mama said to wait. She said never go with strangers." Sophie's voice cracked with exhaustion and fear. "I know, sweetheart," Will said gently, carrying them toward his Mercedes. "But your mama would want you and Tommy to be safe and warm. We're going to take care of you until she comes back." Sophie's resistance crumbled as the warmth of the car enveloped them. She clutched Tommy protectively, but Will could see her shoulders sagging with relief as he turned up the heat and wrapped them both in his expensive cashmere coat. "Where are we going?" Sophie whispered, her teeth still chattering. "To my home. It's safe there, and we have food and warm beds." The drive to his penthouse was silent, except for Tommy's occasional whimper and Sophie's gentle shushing. Will kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching this tiny girl who reminded him so painfully of Emma. The way she held her head, the determined set of her jaw even in exhaustion, it was like seeing his lost daughter again. At his penthouse, Mrs. Chen took one look at the children and immediately sprang into action. She'd worked for Will for over a decade and had helped him through the darkest period after Emma's death. Now, seeing these two desperate children, her maternal instincts kicked into overdrive. "Ay, Dios mío," she whispered, rushing to prepare warm baths and gather clothes. "These babies are half frozen." Within 30 minutes, Sophie and Tommy were clean, warm, and dressed in soft pajamas that Mrs. Chen had somehow procured from the emergency supplies she kept for unexpected situations. Sophie sat on Will's massive leather couch, still clutching Tommy, her eyes wide as she took in the luxurious apartment. "This place is bigger than our whole building," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Do you live here all by yourself?" "Just me and Mrs. Chen," Will said, settling into the chair across from her. "It gets pretty lonely sometimes." Mrs. Chen appeared with a steaming bowl of soup and warm milk for Tommy. Sophie's eyes widened at the sight of real food, and she immediately began trying to feed Tommy first, breaking crackers into tiny pieces he could gum safely. "Eat your soup first, mija," Mrs. Chen said gently in Spanish. "El bebé can wait a few minutes." Sophie shook her head stubbornly. "Tommy first. He's just a baby. He needs food more than me." Will watched, his throat tight with emotion, as this 7-year-old prioritized her baby brother's needs over her own gnawing hunger. When she finally did eat, she did so quickly and efficiently, never taking her eyes off Tommy for more than a few seconds. "Sophie," Will said softly, "when did you last see your mama?" Sophie's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Thursday morning. She had to go to work early because they needed extra help in the kitchen. She made me promise to take care of Tommy and said she'd be back by dinner with groceries." Will's jaw clenched. Today was Saturday evening. This child had been caring for a baby alone for nearly 3 days. "She works hard," Sophie continued, her voice filled with pride despite her obvious worry. "She cleans all the rooms at the fancy hotel downtown and sometimes helps in the kitchen when they're busy. She's really good at making the beds perfect, like in the movies. She taught me how to fold the corners just right." The Grand Harrison Hotel. Will owned it. His heart sank as he realized Maria Elena had been working in his own building while struggling to raise his... He stopped the thought before it could fully form. He couldn't know for certain yet. But the resemblance, the timeline, the name that haunted his memory. "What happened on Thursday?" he asked gently. Sophie's face crumpled slightly. "She never came home. I waited and waited. I gave Tommy his bottles and changed his diapers, but we ran out of food on Friday. Then the landlord came and put all our stuff on the sidewalk. He said Mama didn't pay rent, but she always pays rent. Always." Will felt rage building in his chest, not at the landlord, but at the circumstances that had left these children so vulnerable. "We took our blanket and Tommy's bottles and went to the church," Sophie continued. "Mama always said if something bad happened, churches are safe places. But it was raining, and Tommy was crying, and I didn't know what to do." Her voice broke on the last words, and Will had to resist the urge to pull her into his arms. Instead, he moved to sit beside her on the couch. "You did everything right, Sophie. You kept Tommy safe and warm. You're an amazing big sister." Sophie looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes, eyes that looked so much like his own. "Do you think Mama's okay? She promised she wouldn't leave us. She never breaks promises." Will's heart shattered. I'm going to find out what happened to your mama, okay? I promise. The next morning, Sophie woke up in Will's guest bedroom, a room larger than the entire apartment she'd shared with her mother and Tommy. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she heard gentle voices in the kitchen and smelled bacon cooking, and reality came flooding back. Tommy was still asleep beside her, his tiny fist curled against his cheek. Sophie carefully slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. She found Will and Mrs. Chen in the massive kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. "Need to call child services," Mrs. Chen was saying. "It's the legal thing to do." "Not yet," Will replied firmly. "Give me a few more days to figure out what happened to their mother." Sophie cleared her throat softly, and both adults turned. Will's face immediately softened into a gentle smile. "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" "Okay," Sophie said, though she didn't mention the nightmares about her mother disappearing forever. "Tommy cried twice, but I got him back to sleep. He misses Mama. He always sleeps better when she sings to him." Over breakfast, the most food Sophie had seen in one place in months, Will watched her carefully cut her pancakes into tiny pieces. When Tommy woke up and was settled in a high chair Mrs. Chen had somehow produced overnight, Sophie immediately began feeding him small bites, making airplane noises to make him laugh. "You're really good with him," Will observed. Sophie beamed with pride. "Mama taught me. She said when you love someone, you take care of them no matter what. Tommy's my baby brother, so it's my job to protect him." The simple statement hit Will like a punch to the gut. This child had more natural parenting instinct than many adults he knew. "Tell me about your mama," Will said gently. "What's she like?" Sophie's entire face lit up. "She's the prettiest lady in the whole world. She has long black hair that she braids sometimes, and she sings Spanish songs when she cooks rice and beans. She came here from Guatemala when she was young, like me, but she was brave enough to come all by herself." Will felt something cold settle in his chest. "Does she have any family here? Grandparents, aunts, uncles?" Sophie shook her head sadly. "It's just us three. Mama says family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who loves you and takes care of you. She says we're our own little family and we only need each other." Her face fell. "But she promised she wouldn't leave us. She promised every night when she tucked me in." After breakfast, while Sophie played with Tommy on the living room floor, showing him how to stack blocks and clap his hands, Will made a series of increasingly frantic phone calls. What he learned made his blood run cold. "Mr. Harrison," his head of hotel security reported, "Maria Elena Martinez was found Thursday night in the emergency room at St. Catherine's Hospital. She suffered a severe allergic reaction to medication she took for a headache at work. She's been in a medically induced coma for 3 days." Will gripped his phone tighter. "What medication? How did this happen?" "Apparently, she took some pain relievers from another employee's purse when she got a sudden, severe headache during her shift. She didn't know she was allergic to the specific ingredient. She collapsed in the hotel laundry room around 2 p.m. Will closed his eyes. While Maria Elena had been fighting for her life, her children had been struggling to survive on the streets, with no one knowing they existed. "Sir," the security chief continued, "there's no emergency contact information in her file. No family listed at all. The hospital has been trying to identify next of kin." "I'll handle it," Will said, his voice hoarse. But there was something else troubling him, something beyond the immediate crisis. After ending the call, he pulled out his laptop and began searching through old files, emails, contacts, anything from 8 to 9 years ago. The name Maria Elena Martinez wasn't in his business records, but something about it nagged at him like a half-remembered dream. Then he found it, buried in his personal files from his Harvard days. A photo from a college graduation party dated 15 years ago. In the background, partially visible but unmistakable, was a young woman with long black hair and a radiant smile, wearing a cap and gown. She was laughing at something off-camera, her hand resting on the shoulder of another graduate. The metadata showed her name, Maria Elena Martinez, Master of Education, Harvard Graduate School. Will's hands shook as he stared at the photo. He remembered her now, a brilliant graduate student who'd been getting her master's in education while he was finishing his MBA. She'd been passionate about helping underprivileged children, he recalled. They'd attended several of the same social events, had a few long conversations about changing the world through education and business. She'd been dating a fellow education student at the time, he remembered, but there had been an undeniable connection between them. But if this was the same Maria Elena Martinez, and if Sophie was 7 years old... Will did the math, his heart pounding. The timeline fit perfectly. Sophie had been born 7.5 years ago. 9 months before that would put conception right around the time of their graduation celebration, when Maria Elena had broken up with her boyfriend and Will had been. Sophie's laughter echoed from the living room, and Will felt the world tilt on its axis. Everything he thought he knew about his life was about to change. Will hired the best private investigator in the city within an hour of making his discovery. Detective Sarah Walsh had a reputation for uncovering truths that others missed, and Will needed answers fast. "Mr. Harrison," Detective Walsh said over the phone, her voice professional but kind. "I've done some preliminary checking on Maria Elena Martinez. She graduated from Harvard 8 years ago with a master's in education, magna cum laude. A brilliant student, by all accounts. She worked as a teacher in Boston for 2 years after graduation, then disappeared from public records until she showed up in your city 6 months ago." Will paced his study, while Sophie napped with Tommy in the guest room. "What about the children's father? Any record of him?" "That's where it gets interesting," Walsh continued. "No father listed on either birth certificate. Sophie Martinez was born 7 years and 4 months ago in Boston General Hospital. Tommy Martinez was born 9 months ago at Metropolitan Hospital here in the city. Both birth certificates list only Maria Elena as the parent." Will closed his eyes, doing the math again. 7 years and 4 months ago, he'd been a different man, recently divorced, throwing himself into work to avoid dealing with his failed marriage. He'd attended his Harvard reunion that spring, had a few too many drinks, and... "Detective Walsh," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need DNA tests run, confidentially." The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. "Sir, are you saying you believe you might be the father of one or both of these children?" "I don't know," Will admitted, "but I need to know. The resemblance is striking. And the timeline fits. Mr. Harrison, DNA tests are permanent. Whatever they reveal will change everything. Legally, emotionally, financially. Are you prepared for that?" Will looked toward the guest room, where he could hear Sophie humming softly to Tommy. "I'm already attached to them," he said honestly. "Whether they're mine biologically or not, I care about what happens to them. But if they are mine, you'd want custody. I'd want to be their father. The father I should have been all along." That afternoon, while Sophie was distracted with new coloring books and toys, Mrs. Chen had discreetly purchased, Will collected hair samples from both children for the DNA test. His hands trembled as he sealed the envelopes, knowing that these small samples could rewrite his entire future. Meanwhile, he drove to St. Catherine's Hospital to see Maria Elena. The ICU was quiet, filled with the steady beeping of machines and the soft whisper of ventilators. Maria Elena lay unconscious in bed 3, connected to various monitors, her long black hair spread across the white pillow. She looked older than in the college photo, worn down by years of struggle and single motherhood, but it was definitely the same woman, The same intelligent face, the same determined chin that Sophie had inherited. "Are you family?" a nurse asked, approaching with a chart. "I'm a friend," Will said carefully. "How is she?" "She's been in a medically induced coma since Thursday, but her vital signs are stabilizing. The allergic reaction was severe, but she's responding well to treatment. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." "When will she wake up?" "Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks, but she's a fighter. The doctors can tell. She's been mumbling in her sleep, calling for her children." Will's throat tightened. Even unconscious, Maria Elena was worried about Sophie and Tommy. As he drove home, his phone rang. It was Detective Walsh again. "Mr. Harrison, I found something else. 8 years ago, Maria Elena Martinez made multiple attempts to contact you. Phone calls to your office, emails to your personal account. She even showed up at Harrison Industries once. Your assistant at the time logged all of it as personal matter and noted that you were unavailable due to your family situation." Will's blood turned to ice. 8 years ago, Emma had just died in the car accident. He'd been inconsolable, unreachable, completely shut down with grief. His assistant had standing orders to turn away all personal visitors and screen all calls that weren't business-related. What exactly did she say when she came to the office? According to the log, she said it was urgent and personal. She left her contact information and asked that you call her as soon as possible. The assistant noted that she seemed distressed but wouldn't elaborate on the nature of her visit. Will pulled over to the side of the road, his hands shaking. If Maria Elena had been trying to tell him about Sophie 8 years ago, and he'd been too buried in grief to see her. He'd missed his daughter's entire life because he'd been mourning another daughter. The cruelty of it was almost unbearable. "Detective Walsh," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need those DNA results as soon as possible. Rush order, whatever it costs. They'll be ready by tomorrow afternoon." Will sat in his car for a long time after the call ended, watching traffic flow by while his world continued to shift beneath him. By this time tomorrow, he would know if he was the father of 2 children who had been living in poverty while he sat in his penthouse, completely unaware of their existence. But even more than that, he would know if he'd failed not just 1 child, but 2. Sophie adapted to Will's penthouse with remarkable resilience, but she never stopped watching the door. Every time the elevator chimed or Mrs. Chen's keys jingled, Sophie would look up hopefully, her face falling when it wasn't her mother. "She's coming back," Sophie would say firmly whenever Will or Mrs. Chen tried to gently prepare her for the possibility that her mother might not return soon. "Mama never breaks promises." Never. Despite her worry, Sophie began to bloom in the safety and security of Will's home. She was brilliant, reading books meant for children twice her age and asking questions that consistently amazed Will. Her curiosity was endless. Why did the elevator know which floor to go to? How did the TV change channels? Why were some buildings so tall they touched the clouds? But it was her relationship with Tommy that truly amazed Will. Sophie had essentially raised the baby herself for his first 9 months of life, and their bond was extraordinary. She knew exactly when he was hungry, tired, or needed changing just by his different cries. She could calm him when he was fussy with a special song, or by bouncing him in a particular rhythm. "Mama taught me," Sophie explained one evening, as she fed Tommy his bottle with practiced ease. "She said babies can't talk yet, so you have to listen with your heart to know what they need." Will found himself falling deeper in love with both children every day. Tommy had started crawling toward him whenever he entered a room, reaching up with chubby arms to be held. The baby's trust was absolute and heartbreaking. He had no idea he was living with a stranger. Sophie was more cautious, but warming up to Will gradually. She asked him about his work, his house, why he lived alone. When he told her about Emma, Sophie listened with the serious attention of someone much older. "I'm sorry your little girl died," she said solemnly. "That must make your heart hurt very bad." "It did," Will admitted, "for a very long time. But Tommy and me, we make you happy sometimes, right?" Will's vision blurred. "You make me very happy, Sophie." One evening, as Will was reading Sophie a bedtime story while Tommy played with blocks on the floor, Sophie asked the question he'd been dreading. "Are you going to send us away when Mama comes back?" Will set down the book, choosing his words carefully. "Sophie, what would you want to happen?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I want Mama to get better and come home, but I want you to be there too. You're nice, and you take good care of us, and you make Tommy laugh." She paused, then added quietly, "And you make me feel safe." "You are safe," Will said firmly. "Both of you, I promise. But what if Mama can't come back? What if something really bad happened?" The question hung in the air like a fragile soap bubble. Will looked at this remarkable little girl who'd been forced to confront adult fears far too young, who'd spent 3 days caring for a baby on the streets, but still maintained hope and love. "Sophie," he said carefully, "would you want me to take care of you and Tommy? If something happened to Mama?" Sophie studied him with those serious brown eyes that looked so much like his own. "Would you want to keep us? Really keep us? Not just until someone else comes?" "More than anything in the world," Will said honestly. Sophie's face broke into the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Mama always said family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. You showed up in the rain when we needed you." That night, after Sophie and Tommy were asleep, Will stood in his study, staring at his phone. Detective Walsh had texted that the DNA results would be ready first thing in the morning. In 12 hours, he would know if Sophie was his biological daughter. Either way, he was already committed to fighting for her and Tommy. But the results would determine whether he had any legal right to that fight. As he prepared for bed, Will realized something profound had shifted inside him. For the first time in 3 years, since Emma's death, he felt truly alive. These 2 children had awakened something in him he thought was dead forever. Hope. Tomorrow would bring answers. But tonight, for the first time since losing Emma, Will Harrison fell asleep with a smile on his face, knowing that 2 precious children were safe under his roof. Will stood outside the laboratory building at 8 a.m. sharp, the sealed envelope containing the DNA results trembling in his hands. Sophie was at home with Mrs. Chen, teaching Tommy to wave bye-bye and clap his hands. Whatever was in this envelope would determine whether he could legally fight for custody or if he'd have to watch them disappear into the foster system when Maria Elena recovered. He sat in his car and tore open the envelope with shaking fingers. The words swam before his eyes as his vision blurred. Sample 1, Sophie Martinez. Probability of paternity, 99, 97%. Sample 2, Tommy Martinez. Probability of paternity, 99, 94%. Will stared at the paper, reading the results over and over. Both children, both of them were his. Sophie, the 7-year-old who'd been sleeping on the streets while he lived in luxury, was his daughter. Tommy, the baby who'd been cared for by a child because Will didn't even know he existed, was his son. He leaned against his steering wheel and wept for the lost years, for Maria Elena's struggle, for his children's suffering, and for the overwhelming joy of knowing they were truly his. His phone rang, jolting him back to reality. Detective Walsh. "Mr. Harrison, there's been a development. Maria Elena Martinez woke up this morning. She's stable and asking for her children." Will's hands shook as he wiped his eyes. "Is she? Will she be okay?" "The doctors are optimistic. The worst of the allergic reaction has passed, and her cognitive function appears normal. But, Mr. Harrison, there's something else. When she regained consciousness, she kept repeating your name. She's specifically asking to see you." 20 minutes later, Will stood outside Maria Eleanor's hospital room, the DNA results folded in his jacket pocket. Through the window, he could see her sitting up in bed, still connected to IV lines, but alert and animated as she spoke with a nurse. She looked fragile but determined, her long black hair pulled back in a messy bun. When he knocked and entered, her eyes immediately filled with tears. "William," she whispered, her voice hoarse from days of intubation. "You found them. You found my babies. Maria Elena." He approached slowly, uncertain of his reception. "How are you feeling?" "Terrible," she said with a weak smile, "but alive. The nurse says you've been taking care of Sophie and Tommy. How are they? Are they okay? Are they scared?" "They're safe," Will assured her, pulling a chair close to her bed. "Sophie has been incredible. She's been taking care of Tommy like a little mother." "But Maria Elena, why didn't you tell me?" Her face crumpled with fresh tears. "I tried, William. I tried so hard. After graduation, when I found out I was pregnant, I called you dozens of times. I came to your office. I sent emails." "I know," Will said quietly. "I found the records. But Maria Elena, I had just lost my daughter Emma. I wasn't capable of hearing you then." "I know about Emma," Maria Elena said softly. "I read about the accident in the alumni newsletter. My heart broke for you. That's why when your assistant kept turning me away, I thought maybe the universe was telling me you weren't ready to be a father again. But you tried again later. When Sophie was 2, I brought her to your office. She was such a beautiful little girl, so smart and curious. I thought if you could just see her." Maria Elena's voice broke. "But your assistant said you'd given strict orders about personal visitors. She said you were still too fragile, that seeing Sophie might set back your healing." I Will remembered those dark years after Emma's death. He'd built walls so high that even legitimate attempts to reach him had failed completely. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you, for them. For Sophie's first steps, her first words, her birthdays." "You're here now," Maria Elena said, reaching for his hand. "That's what matters. But Will, I need you to know, I never wanted anything from you. I made my peace with raising Sophie alone. I just wanted her to have the chance to know her father when you were ready." "She's incredible," Will said, his voice breaking. "She's brilliant and brave and so protective of Tommy. She's been taking care of him like he's her own child." "She's yours," Maria Elena smiled through her tears, "in every way that matters. She has your stubborn determination, your quick mind, your way of tilting her head when she's thinking hard about something." They talked for the next hour. Maria Elena explained how she'd struggled as a single mother, working multiple jobs to support Sophie while finishing her teaching degree. How she'd finally saved enough to move to Will's city 6 months ago, hoping for better opportunities and maybe, just maybe, the chance to finally tell him about his daughter. "I got a job at a hotel," she said. "The Grand Harrison. I didn't realize you owned it until I saw your picture in the employee break room. I almost quit that day, but I needed the job too badly." Will's throat tightened. "You were working in my building, and I never knew." "I was planning to try to contact you again," Maria Elena admitted. "I thought maybe enough time had passed, maybe you were ready to hear about Sophie. But then I got that terrible headache at work, and everything went black." "The children were alone for 3 days," Will said, his voice thick with guilt. "Sophie's stronger than I ever was at her age," Maria Elena said proudly, "but she shouldn't have had to be. No child should have to be that strong." As Will prepared to leave to check on the children, Maria Elena gripped his hand tighter. "William, there's something else you need to know. Something I never told anyone, not even the doctors." Will's blood went cold at her tone. "What is it?" Maria Elena took a shaky breath, fresh tears falling down her cheeks. Remember last year when I had to take that second job at the hotel, working double shifts to make rent? Will nodded, though he hadn't known her then. There was a staff party last winter, right after New Year's. You attended. It was for employee appreciation. You probably don't remember, but you talked to several of the housekeeping staff, including me. Will's memory stirred. He did remember attending a hotel function, trying to be more present for his employees after years of isolation. We talked about Sophie, Maria Elena continued. I mentioned having a 7-year-old daughter, and you were so kind, so interested. You said you missed being around children. Her voice dropped to a whisper. One thing led to another, and we spent that night together. The truth hit Will like a lightning bolt. Tommy isn't just Sophie's half-brother, Maria Elena whispered, fresh tears falling. Will, Tommy has the same father as Sophie. He's your son too. Will drove back to his penthouse in a daze, the DNA results and Maria Elena's revelation spinning in his mind. Both children were his. Sophie, who'd been living in poverty for 7 years, and Tommy, who'd been conceived during one night when two lonely people found comfort in each other. But his joy was short-lived. Waiting in his lobby was a stern-faced woman in a grey suit, flanked by 2 police officers. Mr. Harrison, I'm Linda Morrison from Child Protective Services. We need to talk. Will's blood ran cold. About what? About the 2 children you've been harboring without proper authorization. We received an anonymous tip that you're keeping minors in your home without going through legal channels. Sophie ran to Will the moment he entered the penthouse, Tommy crawling behind her at impressive speed. Will, Mrs. Chen made cookies, and Tommy learned to say "Baba" for bottle. But Sophie's excitement died when she saw the strangers behind Will. She immediately scooped up Tommy, backing toward Mrs. Chen with the wariness of a child who'd learned that official-looking adults usually brought bad news. These are the children, Ms. Morrison said, pulling out a tablet and stylus. Sophie Martinez, age 7, and Thomas Martinez, age 9 months. Mr. Harrison, you have no legal right to these children. They need to be placed in protective custody immediately while we locate suitable foster homes. No! Sophie's voice cracked with terror. We're not going anywhere. Will is taking care of us. He promised. Sweetheart, Ms. Morrison said in the practiced tone of someone used to dealing with frightened children. Mr. Harrison isn't your family. You need to be with people who are properly licensed to care for children. But their mother is alive, Will said desperately. She's in the hospital recovering. These children have a parent. Maria Elena Martinez is in no condition to care for minor children, Ms. Morrison replied coldly. Even when she recovers, her living situation was clearly inadequate. These children were found homeless, Mr. Harrison. That constitutes neglect. Will felt rage building in his chest. Maria Elena is an excellent mother who suffered a medical emergency. That's not neglect, that's tragedy. But Ms. Morrison was already approaching Sophie, who had pressed herself against the wall, holding Tommy so tightly he began to whimper. Don't touch us! Sophie screamed. Will, don't let them take Tommy! Please don't let them take my baby! The raw terror in Sophie's voice broke something inside Will. This child had already lost everything once. He couldn't let it happen again. Wait, he said, stepping between Ms. Morrison and the children. I have something to show you. With shaking hands, he pulled out the DNA results. I'm their father, their biological father. I have legal rights here. Ms. Morrison's eyebrows shot up as she scanned the documents. These results are dated yesterday. Mr. Harrison, if you're claiming paternity, that raises even more questions. Where have you been for 7 years? Why aren't you on the birth certificates? This looks like a desperate attempt to avoid a proper investigation. Derat, the situation is complicated, Will said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. But I can prove these children are mine, and I can provide for them better than any foster family. Biological relationship doesn't automatically grant custody, Ms. Morrison replied. We'll need full background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations. Until then, the children need to be placed in licensed care. Sophie began to sob, great heaving cries that made Tommy wail in sympathy. I won't go! I won't leave Will! He's the only one who kept us safe! Will's heart shattered as he watched his daughter, dissolve into the same terror she'd shown that first night in the rain. But this time, he was the one who might not be able to protect her. Give me 24 hours, he pleaded with Ms. Morrison. Let me get an emergency custody hearing scheduled. Don't traumatize these children any more than they've already been traumatized. Ms. Morrison looked at Sophie's tear-streaked face and Tommy's confused whimpers. For a moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing a flicker of genuine compassion. I can give you until tomorrow at noon, she said finally. But Mr. Harrison, if you don't have legal documentation establishing your rights by then, these children will be removed from your custody. No exceptions. After they left, Will held both children while they cried, promising over and over that he wouldn't let anyone separate them. But privately, he was terrified. Even with the DNA results, establishing emergency custody in less than 24 hours would be nearly impossible. Unless he could find a way to prove he was more than just a biological father, unless he could prove he was the father these children needed him to be. Will spent the night making phone calls and pulling every string he had. By 6 a.m., he had 3 of the city's top family law attorneys working on emergency petitions, a child psychologist prepared to testify to the children's emotional well-being in his care, and his accountant preparing financial statements to prove his ability to provide. But the legal system moved slowly, and Will was running out of time. The earliest I can get you before a judge is 3 p.m., his lead attorney, Rebecca Chen, told him, and that's only because Judge Martinez owed me a favor. But Will, you need to understand, the fact that you've been absent from these children's lives for years works against you, DNA or no DNA. What if Maria Elena testifies on my behalf? Will asked desperately. Is she strong enough? And more importantly, will Child Services see her as a credible witness, given that her children were found homeless? Meanwhile, Sophie had overheard enough phone conversations to understand that strangers wanted to take her and Tommy away. She'd spent the morning packing their few belongings into a small backpack, preparing for another escape. We could hide, she whispered to Will when she thought no one was listening. I know places they'd never find us. I kept Tommy safe before. I can do it again. The fact that a 7-year-old felt she needed to protect her baby brother from the adults who were supposed to help them made Will physically ill. Sophie, sweetheart, you're not going to have to hide anymore, he promised, kneeling to her level. I'm going to fix this. But what if you can't? Sophie's voice was small and scared. What if they take us to different houses? What if I never see Tommy again? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Will had no answer that wouldn't be a lie. At 10 a.m., 2 hours before the deadline, Will received an unexpected call. Mr. Harrison, this is Dr. Patricia Velasco at St. Catherine's Hospital. Maria Elena Martinez is asking for you. She says it's urgent and relates to her children's custody situation. Will raced to the hospital, leaving Sophie and Tommy with Mrs. Chen and 2 bodyguards he'd hired to ensure Child Services couldn't remove them while he was gone. He found Maria Elena sitting up in bed, looking pale but determined. She was holding a manila envelope and several photographs. I heard about what happened, she said without preamble. The social worker came to question me this morning. William, I have something that might help, but I need you to know it will change everything between us. Will's stomach clenched. What is it? Maria Elena opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of legal documents. After Sophie was born, I had a lawyer draw these up. I never filed them because I respected your privacy, but... She handed him the papers. They were paternity acknowledgement forms, already signed by Maria Elena, with spaces for Will's signature, dated 7 years ago. You were prepared to name me as Sophie's father. I always hoped someday you'd want to be part of her life, Maria Elena said quietly. These documents establish your paternity legally, not just biologically. If you sign them and we file them today, you'll have immediate legal standing to fight for custody. Oh, Will stared at the papers, his hands trembling. What about Tommy? Maria Elena pulled out a second set of documents. I had these prepared after he was born, too. William, I always believed that someday we'd find our way back to each other, not necessarily as a couple, but as co-parents who loved our children. Why didn't you file them before? Because I wanted you to choose us, Maria Elena said, tears filling her eyes. I didn't want you to feel trapped or obligated. I wanted you to want to be their father. Will looked at the documents that could save his children, then at the woman who'd been protecting him from obligations he didn't even know he had. Maria Elena, he said softly, I don't want to be their father because I have to be. I want to be their father because I can't imagine my life without them anymore. He signed both sets of documents with a pen that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. There's one more thing, Maria Elena said, as Will prepared to leave. The social worker asked me if I thought you were a suitable guardian. I told her yes, but she pushed back. She wanted to know about our relationship, about why I'd trust my children with someone I barely knew. What did you tell her? Maria Elena smiled through her tears. I told her the truth. That you're the best man I've ever known, and our children are lucky to have you as their father. But as Will raced back to his penthouse with the signed documents, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial, something that would determine whether legal papers would be enough to keep his family together. The emergency custody hearing was held in a small, sterile courtroom that smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. Will sat at the plaintiff's table with his legal team, watching as Sophie and Tommy played quietly in the hallway with Mrs. Chen. He'd wanted to spare them the trauma of the proceedings, but Judge Martinez had insisted on seeing the children personally. Your Honor, Rebecca Chen began, my client has overwhelming evidence of his biological relationship to both children, legal documents establishing paternity signed by their mother, and financial means to provide excellent care. This is not a case of abandonment. This is a case of a father who was prevented from knowing his children existed. But the prosecutor from Child Services wasn't backing down. Your Honor, Ms. Morrison argued, biological relationship alone doesn't establish fitness as a parent. Mr. Harrison has no experience with children, no history of involvement in their lives, and no understanding of their needs. These children have been through significant trauma. They need stability and experienced caregivers, not a wealthy stranger playing house. Will felt his carefully constructed hope beginning to crumble. Furthermore, Ms. Morrison continued, the circumstances under which these children came to be in Mr. Harrison's care are suspicious. He found them on the street and simply took them home without contacting authorities. This shows poor judgment at best. Judge Martinez, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the documents carefully. Mr. Harrison, approach the bench. Will stood on shaking legs. Sir, these DNA results are conclusive, and the paternity documents appear to be in order, but I'm troubled by the timeline. Can you explain to me why, if you are indeed these children's father, you've been absent from their lives until now? Will's throat felt like sandpaper. Your Honor, I lost my daughter Emma 3 years ago in a car accident. I was not in a condition to hear or respond to attempts to contact me. Maria Elena tried repeatedly to tell me about Sophie, but my grief made me unreachable. And the second child? Will's face burned with shame. Tommy was conceived last year during a brief encounter with his mother. I didn't know she was pregnant again. I didn't know either child existed until 4 days ago. Judge Martinez studied him for a long moment. Mr. Harrison, even if I grant you emergency custody, this is only temporary. You'll need to complete parenting classes, undergo psychological evaluation, and prove you can provide appropriate care. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Yes, Your Honor, absolutely. And if I determined that these children would be better served in licensed foster care while these evaluations take place? Will's voice broke. Your Honor, Sophie has been through enough trauma. She's been caring for her baby brother like a little mother. She trusts me. Removing them from my care now would be devastating to both children. Judge Martinez called for a brief recess. In the hallway, Sophie ran to Will, wrapping her arms around his waist. Are they going to take us away? She whispered. I don't know, sweetheart, Will said honestly, but I'm fighting as hard as I can to keep you with me. Sophie looked up at him with those serious brown eyes. Will, can I tell the judge something? What do you want to tell her? That you're already our daddy. You feed us and keep us safe and read us stories. That's what daddies do, right? Will's vision blurred. Would you want to tell the judge that? Sophie nodded firmly. Tommy and me, we choose you. Even if the paper says something different, we choose you to be our daddy. When the hearing reconvened, Judge Martinez had made her decision. But first, she called Sophie to the witness stand. Hello, sweetheart, the judge said gently. Can you tell me your name? Sophie Martinez, and that's my baby brother Tommy. Sophie pointed to where Mrs. Chen was holding the baby in the front row. Sophie, can you tell me about living with Mr. Harrison? Sophie straightened in the chair, suddenly looking much older than her 7 years. Will saved us when we were cold and scared. He made sure Tommy had bottles and clean diapers. He reads to me every night and helps me with big words. He doesn't get mad when Tommy cries, and he always makes sure I eat first before he eats. Do you feel safe with Mr. Harrison? The safest I've ever felt, Sophie said solemnly. Except when Mama was with us, Will makes me feel like how Mama made me feel. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. One more question, Sophie. If you could choose where to live, what would you choose? Sophie didn't hesitate. With Will, and I want Tommy with me too. Always together. After Sophie stepped down, Judge Martinez delivered her ruling. This court grants temporary emergency custody of Sophie Martinez and Thomas Martinez to William Harrison, pending completion of required evaluations and classes. However, she continued, and Will's heart stopped, I'm ordering immediate supervised visitation to begin, with the goal of transitioning to full custody within 60 days if all requirements are met. Will's knees nearly buckled with relief. They were going home together. But Judge Martinez wasn't finished. Mr. Harrison, I'm also ordering that Maria Elena Martinez be involved in all major decisions regarding these children once she's released from the hospital. These children need both parents, and this court expects you to facilitate that relationship. As they left the courtroom, Sophie clutching Will's hand while he carried Tommy, Will felt a mixture of triumph and trepidation. He'd won the first battle, but the war for his children's future was just beginning. And somehow, he sensed the biggest challenge was still ahead. 2 weeks after the custody hearing, Will had settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Sophie was enrolled in a prestigious private school, where her intelligence immediately impressed her teachers. Tommy had his first pediatric appointment in months and was pronounced healthy but slightly underweight, a condition that Mrs. Chen was addressing with enthusiastic determination. Will had completed his parenting classes and psychological evaluation with flying colors. Even Ms. Morrison from Child Services grudgingly admitted that the children seemed to be thriving in his care. But it was Maria Elena's release from the hospital that brought the revelation that would change everything. Will picked her up on a bright Thursday morning, with Sophie and Tommy in the back seat chattering excitedly about showing Mama their new home. The plan was for Maria Elena to stay in the guest suite while she regained her strength, and they figured out their new family dynamic. "Mama!" Sophie launched herself into Maria Elena's arms the moment they arrived at the penthouse. "Wait until you see my room. It has its own bathroom and a reading corner and everything." Tommy, now officially walking with confidence, toddled straight to Maria Elena with his arms up, babbling "Mama, Mama" in his sweet baby voice. Will watched the reunion with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. This was what the children needed, their mother healthy and present, but he couldn't help wondering where that left him in their lives. That evening, after the children were in bed, Maria Elena asked to speak with Will privately. They sat in his study, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "William," she began, her voice soft but serious, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you weeks ago, but I was scared of how you'd react." Will felt his stomach clench. "What is it?" Maria Elena pulled out a worn envelope from her purse. "This came to my old apartment 2 months before I got sick. The landlord gave it to me when he was throwing out our belongings." She handed him the envelope. Will's breath caught when he saw the return address: Harrison Legal Services, the law firm handling Emma's estate. "I don't understand," Will said, opening the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter dated 3 months earlier, addressed to Maria Elena Martinez. "Dear Ms. Martinez, we represent the estate of Emma Catherine Harrison. During the process of settling the estate, we discovered that Emma had been trying to locate you for several months before her death. She left specific instructions that if you were ever found, you were to receive the enclosed inheritance. Emma Harrison left you and your daughter Sophie the sum of $500,000 along with a personal letter. We have been unable to locate you to deliver this inheritance. Please contact our office immediately. Sincerely, James Patterson, estate attorney." Will stared at the letter, his mind reeling. "Emma was looking for you? That's impossible. Emma died 3 years ago, and I only met Sophie 2 weeks ago." Maria Elena's eyes filled with tears. "William, there's something about Emma I never told you, something I couldn't tell you when you were grieving." She pulled out another envelope, this one in Emma's childish handwriting. "Emma wasn't just your daughter," Maria Elena whispered. "She was my niece." The words hit Will like a physical blow. "What?" "My sister Carmen married your ex-wife's brother. Emma was Carmen's stepdaughter. After your divorce, Emma would sometimes visit Carmen, and she met Sophie during one of those visits." Will's vision blurred as the impossible truth sank in. Emma knew Sophie. "They were best friends," Maria Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "Emma talked about Sophie constantly, her cousin who lived in Boston, who was so smart and brave. Emma knew Sophie was your daughter before I ever told her." Maria Elena opened Emma's letter with shaking hands. "She left this for you." Will's hands trembled as he read his dead daughter's final words. "Dear Daddy, if you're reading this, it means Maria Elena found you, and you know about Sophie. I'm so happy. Sophie is the best cousin ever, and she's just like you, smart and funny and kind. I know you'll love her as much as I do. Daddy, I know you're sad about the divorce and about Mommy moving away, but Sophie and her mama need you. Sophie told me her daddy is missing, and I know you'd be the best daddy for her. I'm giving them my college money because families take care of each other. Sophie should go to college like you did, and maybe someday you won't be so sad anymore. I love you, Daddy. Take care of Sophie for me. You're Emma." Will collapsed forward, sobbing uncontrollably. Emma had known. His precious daughter had known about Sophie, and had been trying to bring them together before she died. "The car accident," he choked out. "Emma was coming to see you when she died, wasn't she?" Maria Elena nodded through her tears. She was driving to Boston to visit Sophie for her birthday. She had presents and plans. She wanted to surprise Sophie by bringing her father home. The cruel irony was overwhelming. Emma had died trying to reunite Will with the daughter he didn't know he had. His two daughters had loved each other, and he'd never known either relationship existed. "I should have told you sooner," Maria Elena whispered. "But you were so broken when Emma died, and then when I found the letter. I didn't know how to tell you that Emma died trying to bring us together." Will looked up at her through his tears. "She left Sophie her college fund, $500,000. Emma wanted Sophie to have every opportunity you gave her." In that moment, Will understood something profound. Emma's death hadn't been the end of his family. It had been her final gift to him, a chance to love again, to be a father again, to honor her memory by caring for the cousin she'd loved like a sister. Sophie and Tommy weren't just his biological children. They were Emma's legacy, her final act of love. But this revelation would change everything about their custody arrangement, their family dynamics, and the legal battles still ahead. Because now Will knew the truth. Emma had been trying to save them all. The weeks following Emma's revelation transformed everything. Will established the Emma Harrison Foundation, using her inheritance to Sophie as seed money for an organization dedicated to helping single mothers and children in crisis. Maria Elena, once she learned about Emma's gift, insisted that the money be used to help other families rather than just Sophie. Emma wanted to bring people together, Maria Elena said, as they planned the foundation's mission. "This is how we honor that." But the foundation was more than charity. It was healing. For the first time since Emma's death, Will felt connected to his lost daughter's dreams rather than just his grief over losing her. Sophie thrived at her new school, but she never forgot her life before Will found them. She insisted on visiting the cathedral where Will had discovered them, bringing sandwiches and juice boxes for other homeless families. "Emma would have done this too," Sophie told Will matter-of-factly. "Mama told me Emma always shared her toys and helped other kids." The relationship between Will and Maria Elena evolved slowly. They weren't a romantic couple, but they were becoming true co-parents, united in their love for their children and their shared grief for Emma. "I used to think love was about need," Maria Elena told Will one evening as they watched Sophie read a bedtime story to Tommy. "I needed you to love me, to help me, to save me. But what we have now is different. It's about choice." Choice? We choose to build this family together. Not because we're desperate or lonely, but because it's the right thing for Sophie and Tommy. Because Emma wanted us to find each other. Will understood. This wasn't the passionate romance of their youth, but something deeper, a partnership built on respect, shared responsibility, and love for their children. The legal battles gradually resolved in their favor. Will's parenting evaluations were exemplary, and even Ms. Morrison admitted that the children's well-being had improved dramatically since entering his care. The judge granted Will full custody, with Maria Elena as equal co-parent. But the most important change was in Will himself. The man who'd shut himself off from the world after Emma's death had become someone who opened his home and heart not just to his own children, but to anyone who needed help. Sophie started a club at school for kids who'd experienced homelessness or family separation. Tommy, now walking confidently and chattering in a mixture of English and Spanish, had become the beloved mascot of the Harrison household staff. One evening, as Will tucked Sophie into her bed, a ritual that had become sacred to both of them, she asked the question he'd been expecting. "Will, are you happy now?" Will considered his answer carefully. "I'm different than I was before, sweetheart. When Emma died, I thought I'd never be happy again. But you and Tommy taught me that happiness isn't about forgetting sadness. It's about finding joy even when you remember loss. Sophie nodded seriously. Mama says Emma is watching us and she's proud. What do you think? I think Emma sent us to you, Sophie said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that constantly amazed him. She knew you needed us as much as we needed you. As Will turned off Sophie's light and checked on Tommy sleeping peacefully in his crib, he realized she was right. Emma's final gift hadn't just been bringing them together. It had been showing him that love multiplies rather than divides, that opening your heart to more people doesn't diminish what you had before. But there was still one more challenge ahead. One final test that would determine whether this new family could truly heal and move forward together. And it was coming sooner than any of them expected. 6 months after that rainy night when Will found Sophie and Tommy at the cathedral, the Harrison household was preparing for something that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. Emma's birthday celebration. It had been Sophie's idea. Emma should have a party, she'd announced one morning over breakfast. Just because she's in heaven doesn't mean we can't celebrate her. Will's first instinct had been to decline. Emma's birthday had been the hardest day of every year since the accident. But looking at Sophie's earnest face and remembering Emma's letter about wanting them to be a family, he'd agreed. The party was small, but meaningful. Maria Elena had recovered fully and was now working as an education coordinator for the Emma Harrison Foundation. Mrs. Chen had prepared Emma's favorite foods, pizza, chocolate cake, and strawberry lemonade. Sophie had made decorations, and Tommy, now 16 months old and babbling constantly, added his own chaotic joy to the preparations. But it was the gift Sophie had been secretly working on for weeks that brought everything full circle. "This is for Emma," Sophie announced solemnly, presenting Will with a handmade photo album. "I wanted her to see our family." Will opened the album with trembling hands. The first page showed a photo of Emma that Sophie had found in Will's study, surrounded by Sophie's careful 7-year-old handwriting. "Dear Emma, thank you for finding me a daddy." Each page that followed told the story of their new life together. Sophie's first day at school, Tommy taking his first steps, family dinners, bedtime stories, trips to the park. But it was Sophie's captions that broke Will's heart and healed it simultaneously. "Emma, this is me reading the book you left in Daddy's room." "Emma, Tommy learned to say bye-bye today. I taught him to wave at your picture." "Emma, Daddy cries sometimes, but they're happy tears now." "Emma, I take care of Daddy like you asked me to." Will's vision blurred as he reached the final page. It was a drawing Sophie had made of 5 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. Above them, in Sophie's careful printing, were the words, "Our family, Daddy Will, Mama Maria, Sophie, Tommy and Emma, watching from heaven." "Sophie," Will whispered, his voice breaking, "this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." But Sophie wasn't finished. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something that made Will's breath catch. A small, tattered envelope with his name written in Emma's childish handwriting. "Mama found this in Emma's things when she was helping Aunt Carmen clean out the house," Sophie said quietly. "She was saving it for when you were ready." With shaking hands, Will opened what would be Emma's final letter to him. "Daddy, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to give it to you myself. I wrote this after I met Sophie, and I've been carrying it around waiting for the right time. Daddy, I know you think you failed me because you and Mommy got divorced, but you didn't fail. You taught me that love means putting other people first, that family means never giving up on each other, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. Sophie needs those things too. She's scared sometimes, like I used to be when you and Mommy fought, but she's also brave and smart and funny, just like you always said I was. I'm not scared of dying, Daddy, because I know you'll take care of Sophie. She's your daughter too, even if you don't know it yet. And when you love her, it's like you're still loving me. I hid some of my things in your desk drawer, the secret one behind the big drawer that you showed me. They're for Sophie when she's ready. Tell her they're from her big sister who loves her. Don't be sad forever, Daddy. Be happy with Sophie and Tommy and Maria Eleanor. Be the daddy to them that you were to me. I love you bigger than the sky. Emma P.S. Tell Sophie the secret knock for your study door is 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. That's how she'll know she belongs there. Will collapsed into his chair, sobbing openly as the final pieces of Emma's plan revealed themselves. Even facing death, his 8-year-old daughter had been thinking of others, making sure he wouldn't be alone, ensuring that Sophie would know she was wanted and loved. Sophie climbed into his lap, wrapping her thin arms around his neck. Don't cry, Daddy. Emma's not really gone. She's in here. Sophie pressed her small hand to Will's chest, and here, she touched her own heart, and here, she gestured to Tommy, who was clapping his hands at all the attention. She's right, Maria Eleanor said softly, sitting beside them. Emma brought us all together. She's part of our family forever. That evening, after the party dishes were cleaned and Tommy was asleep, Will and Sophie went to his study. Sophie knocked on the door with 3 short taps, 2 long ones, and 1 final short tap. Will smiled through his tears and opened the door wide. Together, they found Emma's secret hiding place. Inside were small treasures an 8-year-old had deemed precious. Friendship bracelets, a music box, a journal filled with stories about a brave princess who helped lost children find their families, and a photo of Emma grinning gap-toothed at the camera. She looks like she was really happy, Sophie observed, studying the photo. She was, Will said. And you know what? She'd be happy now too, seeing our family together. Sophie leaned against Will's shoulder as they sat in his study, their study now, surrounded by Emma's treasures and their new memories. Daddy, Will, Sophie said quietly. Yes, sweetheart. I think I understand now why Emma died. Will's breath caught. What do you mean? Sophie looked up at him with those serious brown eyes that saw so much more than a 7-year-old should have to see. I think Emma knew that heaven needed someone to help other kids find their daddies. And I think she knew you needed us as much as we needed you. Sometimes sad things happen, so beautiful things can happen too. Will pulled Sophie closer, marveling at the wisdom of this remarkable child who'd been through so much, but still believed in the goodness of the world. As they prepared for bed, Sophie made one final observation that would stay with Will forever. Daddy, before you found us, I used to be scared that Tommy and me would always be alone. But Emma made sure we found each other. Now I'm not scared anymore. Now I know that families aren't just born. Sometimes they're made by love. That night, Will fell asleep surrounded by his children. Sophie curled up in the bed beside him after a nightmare, Tommy in his crib nearby, and Maria Elena in the guest room down the hall, all of them safe and loved under one roof. For the first time in 3 years, William Harrison slept peacefully, knowing that Emma's final gift hadn't just been bringing them together. It had been teaching them that love multiplies infinitely, that loss can transform into hope, and that sometimes the most broken people can build the most beautiful families. The little girl who'd slept on the cathedral steps protecting her baby brother had found her home. The billionaire who'd lost everything that mattered had discovered that love was the only wealth that truly counted. And somewhere, in the space between earth and heaven, a little girl named Emma smiled, knowing her family was finally complete.